long years have crawled by since Adama and Elliot's precious albino twins, Amari and Ibrahim, were cruelly snatched from their nanny's care, plunging their once happy household into an endless nightmare of grief and uncertainty. From the very first moments of the investigation, authorities feared the worst. Children with albinism are tragically sought after by traffickers for the unique value placed on their rare appearance. Every lead that sprang up over the years dried to dust, and as each birthday passed without news of the boys, the parents felt their hope fracture into 1,000 pieces. Neighbors whispered about curses and witchcraft. Strangers offered half-hearted prayers. Even the local police, once determined, began to treat the case as another cold file. Yet somewhere beneath the crushing weight of despair, Adama refused to surrender. Each night, she would scroll through the same grainy surveillance stills, studying every corner of each frame, searching for a hint, an altered shirt button, an unfamiliar backdrop that might reignite the investigation. Then came that unassuming Sunday morning in late April, when the soft rays of sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows of First Light Baptist Church, painting rainbow hues onto the worn wood of the pews. Adama and Elliot sat side by side, clasping hands so tightly their knuckles turned white, their hearts pounding in anticipation of an ordinary service. Around them, the congregation murmured hymns. The choir's voices, rich and warm, filled the vaulted ceiling with hope. But for these two parents, every note felt like an echo of the past they could never reclaim. Midway through the sermon, as the pastor spoke of faith in dark times, Adama's gaze drifted toward the back of the sanctuary, toward a pair of faces that belonged neither to childhood nor adulthood, but bore that unmistakable, otherworldly pallor. She squeezed Elliot's hand until he flinched, and together they leaned forward, breathless, as the figures rose and began to move down the center aisle. Elliot's heart thundered in his chest. He felt as though someone had yanked on his ribs, tearing open old wounds. He recognized the way the taller child held himself, with tentative confidence, as if rediscovering lost ground. And the smaller one, who clutched his older brother's hand, bore the same wary curiosity that Amari had shown on his very first day of preschool. Adama's throat constricted, her pulse hammering in her ears as she watched the two pale children draw closer to the front. Every fiber of her being screamed that these were her sons, the boys she had pictured at every prayer, at every midnight vigil. When the twins reached the final pew, they paused, glancing back as if summoned by some invisible force. The congregation noticed the commotion. Whispers rippled through the church like a breeze stirring autumn leaves. Adama pushed past shock, rose to her feet, and stumbled down the aisle, tears spilling silently as she stretched out her arms. The children froze, eyes wide, and then, with a gentle hesitance, they ran into her embrace. In that moment, time seemed to stretch and contract at once. 8 years of agony condensed into a single, miraculous heartbeat. The pastor, tears glistening on his cheeks, lowered his Bible and stepped aside, giving space for a family once thought lost forever to reunite. Neighbors lunged forward with their cameras, but Adama only saw 2 small faces buried in her arms, faces she had longed to kiss, to comfort, to tuck in at night. She clutched their soft cotton shirts, hollowed out from the passing seasons yet alive again, under her fingers. Later, as the church doors swung open to welcome the late-arriving sunlight, the family emerged into the crisp spring morning. Reporters clamored for interviews, flashing microphones and recorders in the boys' faces, but Elliot shielded them tenderly, whispering apologies for the chaos. Together they walked arm in arm through the churchyard, the twins' laughter, a sound once silenced, ringing like church bells in his memory. He vowed to himself that he would never again allow a moment of ordinary joy to slip through his fingers. That evening, back at home, Adama stood at the window of the living room where she had last seen nothing but shadows for years. Now, through the sheer curtains, she watched her family's silhouettes dancing in the yard, the boys chasing fireflies, Elliot coaxing them to catch each glowing speck. Her heart, battered and bruised by sorrow, felt whole again. She turned to look at the untouched phone on the mantel, the same phone that had delivered so much heartache, and then at the photos scattered across the antique dresser, the faded portrait of her younger self before the Statue of Liberty, the snapshots of first steps and birthday candles. Tonight, those images would be joined by brand new pictures: Amari's triumphant grin with a bug net in hand, Ibrahim's surprised frown at the taste of fresh lemonade. 8 years of unanswered questions still lingered in Adama's mind, questions about who had taken her boys, why they were returned now, and what toll those years had taken on their hearts and minds. But as she watched the family she feared forever lost, she allowed herself to believe that hope, once extinguished, could be rekindled in the most unexpected places, sometimes even in the hushed hush of a church bathed in Sunday light. And she knew, with a certainty born of both faith and fierce love, that this time she would never let her boys slip away again. 8 years have passed since Amari and Ibrahim were snatched from under the watch of the very nanny they had trusted, and every day since then has been defined by frantic searches, dead-end investigations, and the aching void left by their absence. Adama's fingers trembled as she tightened her grip on an old photograph, crinkling its edges. A family portrait that once radiated happiness now felt like shards of a broken mirror reflecting the scattered pieces of her life. The pain of that loss had torn her marriage to Elliot apart, leaving them both fractured, haunted by memories of laughter turned to silence. With a deep, shuddering breath, she returned the pictures to the drawer and lifted her gaze to the simple wooden cross and rosary beads that hung above the dresser, silent witnesses to her suffering and the unbreakable thread of her faith. "Lord," she whispered, voice barely audible, "watch over my boys. Bring them home to me and grant me strength to keep believing for as long as it takes." Hours of prayer had become both her refuge and her torture. Each pleading word was laced with the sting of grief and the stubborn flicker of hope that refused to die. The soft chime of the clock signaled the end of her vigil and reminded her that the world continued to turn even as her heart remained frozen in that fateful night. She turned away, the weight of her longing heavy in every step, until the abrupt shrill of the telephone pierced the quiet, yanking her back into the present. Rushing to the kitchen, she scooped up the receiver. "Hello?" she said, voice tight with surprise. "Adama?" came Elliot's concerned tone, an unexpected lifeline. She pressed her free hand to her forehead as the chaos of the morning flooded back, the neighbors' threats, the urgent call to the police, and now this chance to reconnect with the one person who knew every detail of their shared nightmare. "Elliot, I'm so sorry. I left my phone in the bedroom," she explained, forcing calm into her trembling voice. "I've been distracted." His sigh carried years of worry reverberating through the line. The neighbor again? What happened this time? Leaning against the cool granite counter, Adama recounted the morning's confrontation, how the neighbor had raged, calling her home a witch house and vowing to set it ablaze because of who she was. Elliot's frustration crackled through the phone, familiar as the smell of rain on hot pavement. "How many times have I told you to move, Adama? It's not safe for you there." She traced the countertop's veins with her fingertip, voice softening as she defended her choice. "This house is all I have left, of our life together, of the boys." A heavy silence fell between them, saturated with shared regrets. Then, gentler now, Elliot's voice broke through. "Your safety matters more than memories. But are we still on for our meeting?" She glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands mocking her forgetfulness. "Yes, please. I'm on my way." He suggested their usual halfway point, a small cafe tucked between their old neighborhood and the police precinct. "I'll bring the latest reports," he promised. "Maybe there's something we've missed." Hanging up, Adama felt her stomach twist, a cocktail of hope and dread. These meetings had once been their only solace, but now they were bittersweet reminders of how far apart they drifted. She hurried to her bedroom, selecting a modest blouse and skirt that shielded her pale skin from unwanted stares, then gathered her leather folder bursting with police reports, surveillance stills, and scribbled notes. Stepping into the bright mid-morning sun, she squinted against the glare, fumbling in her purse for her sunglasses, an everyday ritual to protect her light-sensitive eyes. That's when she noticed it, a pale envelope tucked beneath her windshield wiper, fluttering in the gentle breeze like a wounded bird. Adama's breath caught as she approached the car, each step feeling impossibly slow. The envelope's rough paper was blank save for a single, crude sketch scrawled across its surface, the outline of a small, limbless figure suspended over what looked like a narrow wooden crate. Her pulse pounded. Every instinct screamed danger. Hands shaking, she peeled the envelope free and peeled it open. Inside lay a single sheet of paper bearing a hastily drawn map of the church she'd attended that morning, complete with an arrow pointing to the exact pew where she and Elliot had sat. Below the map, a chilling message was scrawled in uneven, jagged letters. "Look where God's light falls." A cold wave of dread washed over her. This wasn't just a taunt. It was proof that someone had been watching, tracking her every move, and that the past had somehow collided with the present in a way she could never have imagined. Clutching the note, Adama felt her knees weaken. She sank to the ground beside the car, mind racing with questions. Who left this? How had they known she'd be here? And most terrifying of all, what did it mean for the boys she'd spent a lifetime chasing in her dreams and nightmares? Yet beneath the fear, a fierce spark of determination ignited. She would not be cowed. Standing slowly, she tucked the folded map into her blouse and reached for her phone. Elliot's name stared back at her on the screen. She would call him, and together they would decipher this new clue, no matter where it led. Because after 8 years of unanswered prayers and silent heartbreak, Adama knew one truth above all others. Hope, once kindled, could never be extinguished. 8 years of fear, anguish, and unanswered questions all came crashing back the moment Adama spotted her tormentor standing across the cafe parking lot. The same old woman who had tormented her for weeks, hissing slurs about witchcraft and threatening to burn down Adama's home, emerged from her car with a malicious gleam in her eye. Adama's chest tightened, memories of persecution in her childhood villages flashing like firelight in her mind. She gripped Elliot's arm, voice low but urgent. "That woman, she followed me here. I'm certain of it." Elliot's jaw set in a grim line. "Don't let her intimidate you," he said, guiding Adama gently inside through the cafe's double doors. The warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee and buttery pastries enveloped them, offering a brief respite from the hostility outside. They wove through tables and chairs until they found a secluded corner where neither the neighbor nor curious onlookers could see. Adama sat down heavily, smoothing the skirt of her modest outfit. She closed her eyes for a moment, willing her racing heart to slow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's just, this is getting worse. This morning I found that grotesque drawing on my windshield, a limbless figure hovering over a bubbling cauldron. She wants me to feel helpless." Elliot reached across the table. His hand hovered near hers, familiar and comforting, before he withdrew slightly, respecting the distance her grief demanded. "Adama, I've been telling you, you need to find safer living arrangements. This neighbor, this hate she bears, it's not going to stop." Her throat tightened. The echoes of her father's warnings in Africa, "Never let them corner you, always stay ahead," resurfaced. "I know," she managed, her gaze drifting to the window where clouds scudded across the spring sky. "But packing up and moving isn't so simple anymore. I don't have our boys with me. This house, these memories, they're all I have left of our life together." Elliot's expression softened. "Adama, Memories are precious, but you're in danger. Your safety matters. I know it's hard, but we need you alive, so we can find Amari and Ibrahim." She nodded, her fingers absently tracing the leather-bound folder at her side. The urgency of their mission surged back, drowning out her fear. "You're right," she said, her voice steadier. "Let's not let this derail us. We came here for a reason." With that, she opened the folder and spread its contents across the table. Photocopied CCTV stills, police summaries, hand-scribbled notes, and a faintly yellowed map of St. Louis with red pins marking each investigated lead. "The most concrete trail we have is still that CCTV footage from Tanzania," she began. "The boys were seen near the airport for a few seconds. Their faces blurry, but the timestamp matches the window when the nanny reported them missing." Elliot leaned in, peering at the grainy images. And yet, the footage ended abruptly. No sign of where they went next. He tapped one pin with his fingertip. "And here, in the taxi dispatch logs, there's a missing record. The plate number the dispatcher read out never matched any vehicle on file." Adama's heart pounded. So the taxi was unregistered, likely operating illegally. That explains why it vanished so quickly. She rummaged for a photocopied phone transcript. "I managed to secure these call records. 2 calls placed from that unlisted taxi's number. One to a burner phone in Chicago, another to a number in Miami." Elliot lifted an eyebrow. "Miami makes sense. Major port city. Could be a transfer point for trafficking networks. But Chicago?" She pointed. "The second call went to a number registered to a storage facility near downtown Chicago. I've already reached out to investigators there, but they haven't found anything. Yet." A hush fell between them as they both contemplated the implications. Adama's eyes glistened. "Every lead feels so close and yet so far. I feel like we're always one step behind." Elliot's hand finally found hers, warm and reassuring. "Then we double our efforts. I know you've been working nights, poring over documents when you should be resting. Let me help more. Coordinate with the Chicago unit. Reach out to contacts in Miami. Anything to keep the momentum going." Tears pooled in Adama's eyes. Not of despair this time, but of gratitude. "I can't do this alone anymore. Thank you." They sat side by side, heads bowed over the scattered papers, determined to piece together the fragments of a puzzle that had haunted them for nearly a decade. Outside, the neighbor's car sat idle, its engine ticking, as if impatient to resume its vigil of intimidation. But inside that quiet cafe corner, the true power lay with 2 parents united in purpose. Adama took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "First step," she said, gathering the Tanzanian footage printouts, "is requesting a full audit of taxi records for unregistered vehicles in Dar es Salaam during that 2-hour window." Elliot flipped open his laptop. "I'll draft the request right now and send it through the contacts I have at the International Division. Then I'll call the Chicago detective." She nodded, hope blossoming amid the remnants of fear. They worked in silence, shoulder to shoulder, forging a plan to chase every lead, track every whisper, and outpace the shadowy hand that had stolen their sons. And as they prepared to face dangers both near and far, Adama felt a renewed strength bloom within her, a fierce, unyielding conviction that no act of hatred, no threat of violence, and no obstacle, however daunting, could extinguish the burning light of a mother's love. The mention of Iowa had hit them both like an ice-cold wave. Elliot's brow furrowed as he leaned closer to the table, fingers tracing the faint grid lines of the report. "Iowa," he muttered under his breath, disbelief sharpening his words. "That doesn't make any sense. The timeline, the geography, how could they be spotted there so soon after the Tanzanian footage? It's impossible." Adama's chest tightened as she reached across the cluttered table, closing distance between them with a tremor in her hand. "I know," she replied, voice tinged with frustration and sorrow. "The police dismissed it as a crank tip, but we can't afford to discard any possibility. If someone really thought they saw one of our boys on a farm road in central Iowa, we owe it to Amari and Ibrahim to check it out. They plunged back into the documents, each yellowed page and blurry printout carrying the weight of years of agony. They pored over every datum, the exact timestamp when the anonymous caller claimed to glimpse a pale child with a tuft of white hair chasing butterflies along a cornfield fence. The dispatcher's note that the caller had provided a license plate, number which, when checked, belonged to a rental car company whose records had mysteriously vanished. The single surveillance still from a gas station camera 60 miles away, frozen in time but so grainy that even the shape of a face was indistinguishable. Elliot's agitation grew with every inconclusive detail. His shoulders twitching, he slammed his palm on the laminate surface, scattering a stack of maps. How could someone do this? How could Charlotte simply vanish with our boys and leave no real trace? He exploded, the anger of a father bereft of his children resurfacing in raw, unfiltered waves. Adama flinched at the intensity of his outburst, but she understood. She had felt the same scorching fury during the darkest days after the twins disappeared. Charlotte Abio. He spat the nanny's name like a curse, voice cracking with emotion. If I ever lay eyes on her again— Elliot, please, Adama interjected, her tone gentle but firm. She slid a hand over his clenched fist, flattening his knuckles against the tabletop. That kind of thinking won't help us find them. His gaze locked onto hers, storm clouds of grief and blame swirling in his eyes. How can you be so calm, Adama, after everything we've been through? Adama's breath caught as she lifted her hand to her throat, fingers brushing the smooth wooden beads of her cross necklace. She drew in a steadying breath, recalling the countless hours she had spent praying in this very building across the street. I understand your anger, Elliot, she said softly, voice steadying. Believe me, I've wrestled with every shade of rage and despair, but I found my way back to faith, and that has given me something I didn't think was possible after this long, a measure of peace. I still worry, of course I do, but deep in my soul, I believe we will find them. It's just a matter of time. Elliot loosened his grip, the tension in his jaw easing as he exhaled. His eyes, once so hardened by frustration, softened with contrition. I'm sorry, he said quietly, voice thick with regret. I didn't mean— It's just— Where was your God when Charlotte took our boys? Where is he now when that neighbor is threatening your life every morning? Pain lanced through Adama's chest at his words, a fresh stab on top of old wounds. For a moment, she found no answer that could bridge the gulf between their methods of coping. She looked away, focusing on the shifting patterns of sunlight dancing on the faded carpet beneath the table. Finally, her eyes returned to his. He's here, she whispered, nodding toward her heart. He's in every breath I take to keep searching, and today, he brought me an idea. Elliot raised an eyebrow. An idea? Her gaze drifted to the window, where the afternoon sun gilded the stained glass of the church across the street. Its spire reached skyward like an old friend offering comfort. I missed morning mass at my usual chapel because of the neighbors' threats, but there's a service starting here in 20 minutes. What if we attended together? Maybe stepping away from all this for just an hour, surrounded by something larger than ourselves, could clear our heads, remind us why we fight so hard. He regarded her for a long moment, the papers forgotten between them. Then a tentative smile curved his lips. You know, that sounds actually perfect. It's been too long since we did anything but chase ghosts and fights. Let's give it a try. Relief washed through Adama as they gathered the documents, stacking them neatly. She tucked the report about the Iowa sighting into her folder, determination refueling her spirit. As they rose, she stole a glance at the cafe window. Her neighbor still hunched over a latte, oblivious to their departure, and felt a flush of triumph. They would not be driven back by threats. Hand in hand, they stepped onto the sunlit sidewalk, crossing toward the church whose doors stood open like a promise. The hush of the sanctuary enveloped them as they entered. Polished wood pews, the scent of beeswax candles, the low murmur of voices folding into silence as the congregation settled. Adama's gaze lifted to the vaulted ceiling painted with angels and prophets, each brushstroke whispering stories of perseverance. Elliot drew in a slow breath beside her. Together, they found seats mid-aisle, just as the congregation stood to sing the opening hymn. Their voices, thousands of years of faith woven into melody, filled the air, wrapping around Adama and Elliot like a warm embrace. In that moment, their shared grief felt less solitary, tempered by the collective strength of those around them. And as the notes swelled, Adama closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not just for her sons to be found, but for renewed courage, to follow every clue, to brave every challenge, and to trust that both faith and facts would guide them back to the boys, who had once lit up their lives with laughter and wonder. Welcomed into a space resonant with centuries of faith and devotion, Adama paused just inside the threshold, her pulse slowing as the hush of polished wood and the muted glow of stained glass enveloped her. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her eyes widening to take in the soaring Gothic arches that seemed to stretch heavenward, each ribbed vault tracing the trajectory of countless prayers whispered over generations. Elliot nodded beside her, shoulders folding inward, as if the weight of the space itself instilled both awe and a sudden, almost childlike uncertainty about his own smallness. "It's been a long time since I've been in a place like this," he admitted, voice barely more than a hushed echo beneath the vaulted ceiling. Together they made their way down the broad center aisle, the thick carpet runner suppressing the sound of their steps and those of the few scattered latecomers around them. The gentle murmur of other parishioners blended into a soft backdrop, a reminder that they were not alone in this sanctuary. Adama felt inexplicably drawn to a pew near the middle, where a kaleidoscope of morning light streamed through a towering stained glass window, depicting a circle of saints in serene repose. Their painted eyes seemed to follow each visitor, offering silent benediction. As the ancient organ's first deep chords rumbled through the nave, the priest, an elder with a silver crown of hair and lines on his face that spoke of both sorrow and joy, ascended the pulpit. His voice, clear and resonant, welcomed the congregation, and Adama felt a wave of calm roll over her, as though the very stones of the church exhaled peace. The hymn that followed carried her back to childhood memories of Sunday services in Africa, the steady assurance of communal song, the sense of unity in voices rising together. She closed her eyes, letting the melody wash through her, and when she dared to glance to her side, she heard Elliot's rich baritone rising in hesitant harmony. Tears pricked her eyes at the long-forgotten intimacy of shared worship. But just as the final notes of the hymn faded and the congregation settled, the great doors at the back groaned open, and a hush rippled through the pews. A man in a crisp, immaculately tailored suit strode down the center aisle, his gait measured and purposeful, as though each step carried a weighty resolve. Behind him trailed two young boys whose movements were small and tentative, their arms conspicuously bare, empty sleeves dangling at their sides like silent accusations. Instead of slipping quietly to a rear pew, the trio came directly to the very row where Adama and Elliot sat, pausing a few seats down, their eyes fixed straight ahead. In that suspended moment, the world narrowed to the two pale children and the lines of anguish that creased their small faces. Their skin, ghostly beneath the multi-hued light, mirrored Adama's own albinism with haunting clarity. Their hair, a shock of luminescent white, made her breath catch in her throat. Elliot's gaze followed hers, and when his eyes fell on the boy's empty sleeves, his hand flew to his chest as though bracing against a blow. "My God," he murmured, throat constricted. "What happened to them?" A deep ache settled in Adama's chest, an ache born of recognition and sorrow for this fresh cruelty. She swallowed hard, voice thick, as she leaned closer to Elliot. "They must have been rescued," she said quietly. "In some places, albinos are targeted for body parts, arms, legs. They're believed to hold mystical power in rituals that promise wealth or success." Elliot's face paled at her words. He reached across the pew to link his fingers with hers, a gesture both tender and desperate. "That's horrific," he breathed. "Do you think they were brought here from Africa?" Adama nodded, her gaze never leaving the boys. "It's possible. But look at those bandages. They're recent. Rituals like that couldn't be performed openly in most African communities anymore. The legal risks are too high. Someone must have trafficked them here first, to a place where they could carry out the violence in secret." The boys sat utterly still, their faces blank, exuding a hollow emptiness that spoke volumes about the trauma they had endured. It was a look Adama had encountered before in children shattered by fear, yet something about these two felt different, an otherworldly stillness that pricked at the edges of her mind. Elliot tugged at her sleeve, eyes flicking toward the priest, who had resumed the liturgy as though nothing had happened. "Adama," he whispered, "I know you mean well, but we shouldn't stare. That man with them, he's probably their guardian. He won't appreciate our gawking." Embarrassment colored her cheeks as she realized how intently she'd watched, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. The children's vacant expressions whispered of suffering that demanded acknowledgement, not polite silence. She pressed her lips together, summoning a calming breath. The priest's words floated around them, verses about compassion, about bearing one another's burdens, and in that moment, Adama felt the weight of her own grief shift. She drew strength from the chorus of voices singing in unison, and from Elliot's steady presence at her side. When the service ended, they lingered in the pew, allowing the final amen to echo off the stone walls before slipping quietly toward the front. Adama knew she had to speak with the man and learn what she could for her own search, and perhaps in helping these boys, she might gain insight into the fate of her own twins. As they approached, her heart pounded with both trepidation and resolve. In a world rife with cruelty, this church had become a place where suffering was seen, where broken souls might find solace, and where perhaps Adama's own fractured hope could be pieced back together, one act of compassion at a time. Adama forced herself to stop staring at the newcomers and redirected her attention toward the front of the church. "You're right," she murmured to Elliot. "I'm sorry. I just can't stop thinking about what they must have endured." As the service continued, she tried to concentrate on the priest's words and the familiar cadence of the Mass, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the two albino boys across the aisle. Their presence stirred something profound in her, a blend of compassion, sorrow, and an unexplainable sense of kinship. Silently, she offered prayers, not only for her own missing sons, but for these two strangers as well. Whatever horrors they had survived, she hoped they might find solace and healing here, within these hallowed walls. Yet even as the ritual's call and response rhythms washed over her like a comforting tide, Adama's gaze returned again and again to the boys. There was a nagging sense of recognition she couldn't shake, something about their posture, their stillness, that felt eerily familiar. Shafts of multicolored light danced across the congregation as the late morning sun shifted, gilding the scenes of saints above and splashing rainbows across the worn wooden pews. When the priest rose to descend from the pulpit and invite the congregation to exchange the sign of peace, Adama's heart pounded. She smoothed her skirt with unsteady fingers, preparing herself to face the two boys directly. Elliot, ever polite despite the tension, had already turned to greet the parishioners behind them. Taking a deep breath, Adama rose, stepped into the aisle, and approached the boys. "Peace be with you," she whispered, extending her hand in friendship. Her voice trembled, nearly swallowed by the low hum of greetings around her. but the boys did not respond. They sat motionless, eyes fixed forward, seemingly gazing far beyond the church's nave. Their unblinking stares left Adama with a chill. She felt almost as though they were not actually here with her, but somewhere far away, trapped in memories or pain she could barely imagine. The man in the suit, who had been smiling stiffly at another parishioner, abruptly turned toward Adama. Swiftly, he positioned himself in front of the boys, a gesture that was part protective, part territorial. "I'm sorry," he said smoothly, his cultured accent coloring each word. "They've had a very difficult morning." His eyes flicked over her, assessing her every feature, and Adama felt strangely exposed under his gaze. She nodded, mustering a calm smile. "Of course," she replied, "we all carry burdens." But almost at once she saw the shift in his expression. His eyes widened, and his stare grew calculating. She had grown used to the startled double-takes that her albinism often provoked, but this was different, predatory, invasive. When he extended his hand, she placed hers in his, expecting only the brief clasp of courtesy. Instead, his grip lingered, his thumb brushing over her skin as if he were appraising its texture. The cool pressure sent an involuntary shiver through her. She broke free gently, stepping back, heart hammering in her chest. I should return to my seat," she whispered, voice tight and breathless. She quickly retreated to Elliot's side. He leaned in close, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, eyes flicking toward the stranger. Adama swallowed, forcing steady breaths. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "That man, something about him feels off." Before Elliot could respond, the priest's voice rose above them, calling for silent attention. The sermon resumed, but Adama couldn't focus. Her mind kept replaying the unsettling handshake, the boys' empty gazes, and the man's predatory leer. She stole another look across the aisle. The boys still sat rigidly, heads bent slightly forward, hands lying in their laps. Their hair, shorter than hers but unmistakably fine and silky, caught the sunlight that filtered through the glass. Then she noticed their ears, a delicate, pointed shape at the upper ridge, a feature she had inherited from her father. Her breath caught. It was the same unique ear shape she and her twin sons shared, a subtle, familial hallmark. Adama's pulse quickened. Her hand found Elliot's beneath the pew. "Elliot," she whispered so quietly that only he could hear. "Look at their ears. They match ours." Elliot's eyes narrowed as he followed her gaze. His hand gripped hers tighter. Around them, the congregation murmured prayers, unaware of the small but seismic moment unfolding in their midst. Adama's heart both soared with hope and thundered with dread. Could these boys, far from their homeland, be connected to her own missing children? Or was her grief playing cruel tricks on her mind? As the priest's final blessing echoed through the nave, Adama pressed closer to Elliot. She could not let this revelation go unspoken, but she also needed to be cautious, to protect herself, and, possibly, to safeguard two traumatized children. The organ's last note lingered in the stillness as parishioners began to rise. Adama rose too, determination lighting her eyes. Whatever lay ahead, answers, danger, or heartbreak, she would face it as she always had, with faith, with the fierce love of a mother, and with Elliot by her side. Together, they would step forward into the unknown. Elliot's face drained of color as he absorbed Adama's words, his eyes flicking back to the church doors through which the man and the boys had vanished. "You really think it could be them?" he whispered, voice trembling. Before she could answer, Adama dashed past him, neglecting the scattering of people who stared in confusion as she barreled toward the sanctuary entrance. Ignoring the protest of an usher who reached out in alarm, she burst through the heavy wooden doors into the sunlight-soaked courtyard and skidded to a halt, scanning the empty sidewalk and the parked cars beyond. Elliot caught up in a few hurried strides, calling her name. "Adama, wait." but she didn't hear him. Her heart pounded too loudly. Where was that man's car? Where had he bundled the boys? They collided just outside the threshold, and she grabbed his arm, breath coming in ragged gasps. "They walked out that way," she panted, pointing toward the narrow side street that ran between the church and the adjacent row of townhouses. He didn't look back. They couldn't have gone far. Elliot's protective instinct flared. He pulled her close for a heartbeat, pressing his lips to her temple, as if willing her to find calm in his steadiness, then released her and jogged toward the road. Adama followed, her shoes clicking against the sidewalk stones, adrenaline sharpening every sense. As they reached the corner, they saw the man's sleek sedan idling by the curb. The boys sat in the back seat, their small faces pressed to the glass, watching a world they did not fully comprehend. Elliot strode forward, raising his hand in a cautious gesture of greeting. "Sir, please, wait!" The driver's side window slid down with a soft click. The man turned, jaw tight, his cultured accent slicing through the afternoon air. "Please step back," he said curtly. "You've caused enough distress." Adama swallowed the lump in her throat, summoning every ounce of composure. "I only want to ask, your sons, their hair, their ears, it's exactly the same as mine," she said, voice low but urgent. "I thought perhaps there was—" He cut her off with a single word. "Stop." His tone brooked no argument. Yet in that moment, as the late spring breeze tousled her hair, Adama felt an unbreakable conviction lock into place, a silent vow that she would not be turned away, that she would dig until she unearthed the truth, however painful. Elliot placed a firm hand on her elbow. "Adama, let's go," he murmured, but she shook her head, eyes blazing with determination. "I have to know," she whispered, gripping his wrist so tightly her nails bit into his skin. He met her gaze, torn between love and reason, and finally nodded. Together they stepped toward the driver's door, but before they could reach it, a uniformed church security officer appeared at Elliot's side, blocking their path. "I'm sorry, folks," he said firmly. "You can't proceed any further. Please leave the premises." The officer's tone was polite but final. Adama swallowed her disappointment and fear, her chest tightening as she glanced back at the boys' faces one last time. The sedan's engine purred as the man slid the window shut, and with a short, tense nod, he drove away. As the taillights blinked into the distance, Elliot wrapped an arm around Adama's shoulders, guiding her back toward the church steps they had just left. "We'll get answers," he said, voice resolute, as though speaking to himself as much as to her. Adama leaned into him, tears glimmering in her eyes, but her chin lifted, a fierce spark alight in her heart. "I know," she whispered. "I promise you, we'll find out who those boys really are. And if there's any link to Amari and Ibrahim, we will bring them all home." And as they climbed the final church steps together, the stained glass windows behind them glinted in the dying light of day, casting fractured rainbows at their feet, an omen of broken things made whole again, if only they had the courage to see the path forward. Pastor Dodd's warm smile wavered for a moment, and he clasped his hands in front of him. I'm afraid I don't know his name," he admitted, voice low. "He arrived just before the service, asked if he and his boys could attend. I welcomed them, but didn't think to introduce myself. I only noticed afterward that he didn't sit with any regular parishioners." Elliot exchanged a glance with Adama, then pressed gently, "Pastor, did you see where he parked, or hear anything he said to anyone else?" The pastor frowned, thinking, he spoke very little. "After the candle ceremony, I overheard him asking one of our deacons for directions to the back exit, and I believe he mentioned heading toward the old docks district. He called the boys by name, Eli and Jonas, but when the deacon asked about their mother, he became curt and left abruptly." Adama's heart skipped. "Eli and Jonas," she echoed. "Thank you, Pastor. That's more than we had." She turned to Elliot, hope and urgency mingling in her eyes. The docks, you said? He nodded, pulling out his phone as he led her back toward the sanctuary doors. If we can get to the docks before nightfall, we might intercept that car, or at least find witnesses who saw them. As they stepped back into the Sunday sunlight, Adama took a steadying breath, her resolve crystallizing. 8 years of cold walls and dead-end leads had taught her patience, but now she had a name, a place, and a sliver of a chance. She slipped her hand into Elliot's. "Let's go find Eli and Jonas," she said, voice firm despite the tears still burning her eyes. Elliot nodded once tightly. Together they hurried toward their car, the cathedral's ancient stones receding behind them as they raced toward the docks and toward whatever answers the fading light still held. Adama's shout ripped across the immaculately trimmed lawn. Stephen Harper stiffened, one arm circling the boy's shoulders as though to shield him from her gaze. The other man, taller, with salt and pepper hair, froze beside an open car door, the envelope still clutched in his hand. "Who are you?" Stephen snarled, eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" Adama swallowed hard, her voice trembling but loud enough for them all to hear. "I want to know why you have those boys, and who you really are to them. They're missing arms. They're albinos, just like my sons, just like me." Elliot stepped forward, placing himself between Adama and the two men. "We saw them in church. You called them Eli and Jonas. We've been searching for our sons, Amari and Ibrahim, for 8 years. These boys, they could be our children." Stephen's face flickered with anger, then something darker, panic. He shifted the boy behind him. "You're trespassing. I don't know what game you're playing, but get off my property." The taller man glanced toward the street, as if waiting for someone, or something, to happen. The envelope in his hand rustled. Adama realized it wasn't an invitation or a greeting card. It was official, court documents or perhaps a private adoption agreement. "No," Adama said, voice steadier now. "We're not leaving until we know the truth. Those boys belong to us." Elliot produced his phone, holding it up like a shield. "I'm calling the police. You can either explain yourself now or answer their questions later with handcuffs on." Stephen swallowed visibly. He glanced at the envelope, then back at the boys, who stood silently, their pale faces impassive beneath the afternoon sun. Guilt flickered in his eyes. "Wait," the taller man said, stepping forward. He cleared his throat. "Detective Harper, please." His voice was clipped, professional. "There's been some misunderstanding." Adama froze. Detective Harper? Could Stephen really be a police detective, or using the title to intimidate them? She exchanged a glance with Elliot. Intrigue warred with distrust. Before they could respond, tires squealed, and an unmarked sedan pulled up. 3 officers in plain clothes spilled out, badges flashing as they advanced onto the lawn. The taller man, now clearly in charge, straightened. "Officer Mason," he greeted one of them. "These people are trespassers. They claim these children are theirs, but they have no proof." Adama's breath caught. Elliot moved beside her, protective. She forced herself to speak calmly. "Detective, Officer Mason, I'm Adama Cater, and this is my husband, Elliot. 8 years ago, our twin sons, albino boys, were abducted. We've never stopped looking. We saw Eli and Jonas in church this afternoon. They have the same rare condition, the same missing arms. Please, let us see their birth records." The officer glanced at the envelope in the taller man's hand, then at his colleague, Stephen Harper. Tension crackled in the air like static. At last, Officer Mason spoke, voice even but firm. "Harper, I need to see those documents, and I need to know why these people say those children match your description." He turned to Adama and Elliot. "Step aside, please. We'll sort this out here." Stephen let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He handed the envelope to Mason, who flicked it open under the shade of an ornamental maple and retrieved a stack of papers, private adoption filings, court orders, and medical affidavits documenting the boys' injuries. "Eli and Jonas Harper, Mason read aloud, scanning the top sheet. Legally adopted in 2021 by Stephen and his late wife, Rebecca. Their mother, he hesitated, misreading a date, died in 2019 in what was deemed a trafficking raid in Lagos. He looked up at Adama and Elliot. I know this is difficult, but these records are clear. Adama's heart pounded. The names, the dates, they almost aligned with her own twin's disappearance. She swallowed, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. Officer Mason continued, We'll arrange for you to speak privately with the boy's guardian and social worker. If you truly believe there's been a mistake, if there's any doubt, an investigation will be opened. Elliot exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging with relief and lingering tension. Thank you, officer. That's all we ask. Mason nodded. He ushered Stephen and the other man back toward the car while two uniformed officers guided Adama and Elliot to the sidewalk, away from the manicured lawn. Adama watched as the envelope's papers were folded back into their sheath. Her mind spun with questions and the faintest spark of hope. If these were indeed her sons, then somewhere inside those guarded faces lay the missing pieces of her fractured family. If not, she would have to begin again. But standing beside Elliot under the late afternoon sun, she realized she had taken the first step toward the truth, no matter where it led. And that thought, more than anything, made her feel alive again. Detective Grant's hard stare pins Stephen in place as he finishes his confession. The afternoon light slants across the yard, casting long shadows over the manicured lawn and over the crime that has been laid bare. Without a word, one of Grant's officers steps forward and snaps a set of handcuffs onto Stephen's wrists. He barely resists, eyes glazed with the horror of his own deeds. The taller man, Luca, collapses to his knees, shoulders heaving, as the uniformed officers guide him away too. Two plainclothes detectives fan out, carefully opening the gate and sweeping the entire property for any sign of the second boy. Adama, still clutching her burning candle, rushes past them and hurries to the back seat of the luxury sedan. Inside, she finds the first boy, her heart nearly stopping at the sight of his familiar pale face. He sits huddled between car seats, eyes glassy with confusion and shock. Slowly, gently, she kneels on the grass beside him. It's okay, she whispers, voice cracking. I'm Adama. You're safe now. She brushes a trembling strand of white blonde hair from his forehead and finds herself gazing into the bright, crystalline blue of his eyes. They hold no recognition, only the wide-eyed terror of a child who has known only pain for far too long. Elliot appears at her side, his face etched with relief. He presses a hand to the boy's good shoulder, offering silent comfort. We're your parents, Amari, or Ibrahim, he murmurs, as if testing the words against the truth in his heart. The boy flinches but does not shrink away. Behind them, officers call out as they round the corner of the villa. There, beneath a stone portico, stands a second pale child, the twin whose absence has tormented Adama for 8 years. His arms, too, have been cruelly taken, his sleeves empty and eerily silent. Upon seeing his mother's frantic approach, he takes an involuntary step back, uncertainty warring with relief in his wide eyes. No more running, Adama implores gently, tears streaming down her cheeks. It's really me, really us. She extends her arms, and after a long moment, he slumps forward into her embrace. His body is small beneath her, but the weight she feels is years of anguish lifting at once. Detective Grant watches with a grim satisfaction, then turns to his team. Get them medical attention immediately, he orders, and secure every document, every transaction record from Harper's office. We're going to find out who else is involved. Adama and Elliot remain locked in that miraculous moment, two fractured souls made whole again by the return of their children. Paramedics arrive within minutes, gently lifting the twins into stretchers and wrapping them in blankets. Adama clings to Amari, whispering promises of love and safety, while Elliot steadies Ibrahim, murmuring apologies for every lost day. The children's faces are pale and drawn, but as the antiseptic scent of the ambulance washes over them, their breathing steadies. Later, as the sun begins its descent, the family gathers, first in the back of an unmarked police van, then in the sterile embrace of the hospital's pediatric ward. Adama sits between the twins' beds, her hand resting on each of their small forearms. Elliot stands behind her, one arm looped around her waist, and the other clutching a single photograph of the four of them together, taken long before the nightmare began. "Welcome home," Adama whispers, voice hushed with awe and relief. The twins stir, their blue eyes flickering toward her, and in that instant, every prayer she ever uttered, every tear she ever shed, finds its answer. The long road to healing stretches out before them, but for the first time in 8 years, Adama and Elliot know they will walk it as a family, never again to be torn apart. Elliot's face twisted with fury. "You monster," he hissed. "You treat children like merchandise." Detective Grant raised a hand to calm him. "How did these boys end up in Tanzania?" he asked Stephen. "If they're truly the Cater twins, they were born here in St. Louis." Stephen shrugged. "The trader said he obtained them from a wealthy American family. They've been bought and sold again and again. I never asked too many questions. I just brought them to Clayton and kept them in my home until Astor's ship was ready for the next shipment." As the magnitude of Stephen's admission settled over them, Detective Grant turned to Adama and Elliot. His tone was gentle but unwavering. "If this is true, it implies that the nanny who kidnapped your sons sold them into this horror, only for them to end up back here. It's more than coincidence. It could be called fate, or divine intervention." Adama nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her faith, which had carried her through so many dark years, felt both vindicated and tested beyond endurance. Officers swarmed the estate, searching the house and interviewing the staff, while Adama and Elliot stood in stunned silence, grappling with the full scope of what they had discovered. Stephen's hollow confession continued to echo. "The trader told me to bring them to church, said they were familiar with religious settings and it would keep them calm. I didn't question it." Elliot's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his whole body rigid with barely contained rage. "You paraded our disfigured, traumatized children in front of God, pretending to be a devoted father." Detective Grant placed a steadying hand on Elliot's shoulder. "I know this is painful," he said quietly, "but we have to stay focused. Every detail could be vital to dismantling this network and rescuing other victims." After a long silence, Adama, who had stood quietly, spoke up, her voice soft but resolute. "I understand," she said, eyes locked on one of the silent boys nearby. "I lived through similar horrors in Africa, the fear, the ever-present threat, but I had my family with me. These boys only had each other." Detective Grant nodded gravely. "I've seen cases of albinos being targeted for body part trafficking, but this rings with international scale," he acknowledged. Just then, a commotion from the house drew their attention. Officers emerged carrying the second pale child, and Adama's heart leapt as she watched the twins reunited. They wrapped their remaining arms around each other, faces flickering with the first signs of emotion since their rescue. A social worker arrived, introducing himself and approaching the boys. His gentle attempts at conversation were met with silence. Their eyes remained distant and unfocused. Turning to Adama and Elliot, his expression was heavy. "This won't be easy," he warned. "They're deeply traumatized, likely conditioned by their captors, but there is hope. With time, therapy, and love, they can heal. I'll arrange for a child psychiatrist to begin working with them immediately." Adama's tears flowed freely as she absorbed his words. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in years, there was a clear path forward. As the police prepared to transport everyone for formal statements, Elliot leaned toward Adama and whispered, If you hadn't insisted on that church today, we might never have found them. You never lost hope. Under the flashing red and blue lights, Adama, exhausted in body and spirit, leaned against Elliot for strength as they headed to the waiting squad car. Then, at the gate, she spotted a familiar figure, her troublesome neighbor, Malene Tara, standing with a look of shock on her weathered face. Detective Grant called her over. Adama explained, "That's my neighbor, the one who's been harassing and stalking me all day. She must have followed us here." The detective's eyes narrowed as he approached Malene, who trembled under their scrutiny. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "why are you here, and why have you been following Mrs. Cater?" Malene fell silent for a long moment, her gaze shifting between Adama and the detective. Finally, in a barely audible voice, she confessed, "My name is Malene Tara, and I'm so sorry. I didn't know until just now. I'm sorry for eavesdropping and stalking you." Tears welled in her eyes as she continued, "My parents always taught me that albinos were demonic, bringers of misfortune. I believed them all my life, but hearing this, I had no idea how much you suffered." Adama felt a swirl of anger, pity, and weary understanding. "How could anyone see us that way?" she asked, voice cracking. "We're human beings with feelings, hopes, and dreams, not mystical vessels." Malene nodded, shame etched on her face. "You're right," she admitted. "I was blinded by prejudice and ignorance, and because of that, I saw something years ago, but did nothing." Adama's breath caught. "What do you mean?" she pressed. Malene's voice trembled with regret. "The night your boys disappeared, I saw the nanny taking them out of the house. It struck me as odd, but I didn't want to get involved. I didn't care enough to intervene." Detective Grant stepped forward, his expression resolute. "Ma'am, I need you to come to the station and make a formal statement. What you witnessed could be crucial in tracking down the nanny and unraveling this trafficking ring." As Malene nodded and was escorted back under police supervision, Adama felt a profound sense of closure. The neighbor who had caused her so much distress had, in a twisted turn of fate, become the key to unveiling the full truth of her son's disappearance. Sitting beside Elliot in the back of the police car, Adama reflected on the day's events, how a single decision to attend a different church had set off a chain reaction leading to this moment. "It's remarkable," she said softly. "Prejudice can blind us to others' shared humanity. Yet once those blinders fall away, understanding and healing can begin." Elliot squeezed her hand gently. "We have a long road ahead," he said, voice a blend of tenderness and resolve. "But we'll face it together, rebuild our family, and ensure our boys get the care they need." As the car pulled away into the night, Adama looked up at the star-filled sky and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the chance to hold her sons, again, to guide them toward healing, and to remember that even in the darkest times, hope and love can light the way forward.